Okay, 4.9, War in the West, at Sea, and in the South. Daily Focus, you guys should have had these answers already, so I'm going to give you some answers. Number 1 should be Marquis de Lafayette. Number 2, why was Valley Forge so bad? There's a lot of different answers here, but pretty much it was one of the coldest winters on record. They had lack of supplies, shelter, and lack of nutrition. Number 3, the Baron Friedrich von Steuben. 4, Bernardo de Galvez. All right, so we need to cover the war at West, at Sea, and in the South. So we're going to cover the war in the West. Not much fighting going on in the West, but some of the fighting that does go on goes in that Ohio River Valley. No one was really fighting until this guy, George Rogers Clark, took a group of fighters to attack British forts. Many Native Americans helped the British because of the Proclamation of 1763. We violated that. They didn't like the Americans coming over here, so they tried to help out the British. In order to get the British to surrender their outpost at Vincennes, George Rogers Clark captured one of the Native American scouts that they found on their way there. They actually marched through the swamp and snow during the winter all the way to the front gates of Vincennes. Got the British attention. Clark ordered them to surrender, or they would suffer the same fate as the captured Native American. Now here's where it gets a little cool. They pulled the Native American up so everybody could see, showing the British that they had captured this guy that was on their sides. He says, "We will offer no quarter if you refuse to surrender." No quarter means when they take over the fort, they're going to kill everybody. No, like people that they're going to like keep as prisoners of war or anything. They're just going to kill everybody. And to prove his point, George Rogers Clark pulls up his gun and blows away the Native American right there. Shoots him right in the head, dead. The British surrendered right then and there. Because of this, at the end of the war, we negotiate the Treaty of Paris to end the revolution, and it helps us gain that land out in the Ohio River Valley as American land. The war at sea, a little bit different. War at sea is completely dominated in general by the British. Remember, they have the strongest navy in the world. And they use that navy to pretty much blockade American ports. They cut off supplies, reinforcements from getting anywhere. So pretty much ports are shut down in America, meaning our economy is also going to go down. Because we don't have a regular navy, they're slowly starting to build ships as they can. But because we don't have a navy, we're going to use privately owned ships called privateers. They're basically trade ships that they were used for imports and exports. Since imports and exports have been shut down by the British blockade, they were outfitted with a few cannons and used to basically just be a pest in the British Navy's side. Congress actually authorized about 2,000 of these ships to sail as privateers. The British did not call them privateers. The British actually called them pirates because they were firing on naval vessels, capturing things. We do have some success at sea. One guy that stands out, remember people test, so write down John Paul Jones, one of our biggest naval heroes. He actually takes a ship and sails over across the Atlantic Ocean, remember 3,000 miles away, to Great Britain, off the coast of Great Britain. His ship, John Paul Jones's ship, is named the Bonhomme Richard. Or, if you say it in French, it sounds different. The Bonhomme Richard, or whatever it is. I'm not French. But here's what it means. Poor Richard's Almanac. Poor Richard is what Bonhomme Richard means in English. Poor Richard's Almanac, if you guys remember, was a very famous almanac written by and published by Ben Franklin. So, to respect Ben Franklin, they name the ship Bonhomme Richard. John Paul Jones takes this ship and is engaged in battle with the British warship Serapis. So what happens here? The British engage John Paul Jones' ship, the Bonhomme Richard. As he's engaged with the British warship, the Serapis actually shoots a full barrage of cannon shot, almost destroying the Bonhomme Richard at the beginning of the battle. And John Paul Jones is asked to surrender. And this is where we get his famous lines, and it says it right there. I have not yet begun to fight. He should have surrendered according to, normal rules of war like the British wanted. But, we fight dirty because we're Americans. And so they sail around each other for over 3 hours exchanging cannon fire. Until John Paul Jones gets a lucky shot off on the British ship, knocks down their main mast. Without your main mast, you can't move. You're dead in the water. At that point, the British are forced to surrender. Huzzah, the American wins. However, unfortunately, the American ship, the Bonhomme Richard, was quickly taking on water and is about to sink. So John Paul Jones moves all of his crew to the British ship, puts all of the British guys in the brig, the jail down below in the ship. He fixes the mast and then raises the U.S. flag and sails home in the British ship, all the while the Bonhomme Richard sinking behind him. So we've got the war in the West, we've got the war at sea, and now the war in the South. This is where the majority of fighting is going to happen. In 1778, the British basically changed their strategy. Remember, their strategy was before to separate New England from the rest of the colonies. But that didn't work. They didn't meet up in Albany. So they're deciding to move the majority of the fighting to the South. The South has many loyalists, and because they have their allegiance to the Anglican Church. And you can see on this map right here, they're going to start at the very southernmost state, which is Georgia. So they start at Savannah, and they will slowly move their way up. So they're going to start down here and slowly move their way up in the south, trying to take over as much land as they can. Once they take over most of Georgia, they start moving north with a lot of success. The top general for the British at this time in the south is General Charles Cornwallis. You might want to write his name down. It is right there. General Charles Cornwallis remains in the south as commander of the British forces. It's going to be his job to take over as much land, as many cities in the south as possible. You can see by this picture down here, bunch of troops, obviously not from 1778, because, hello, there's a water tower in the background. Yeah, this is all, of course there was no photography back then, but here are some reenactment pictures that I put on here. So after numerous British victories, the Americans start using guerrilla warfare. Write that down, highlight it, underline it. Guerrilla warfare to catch the British off guard. One of the most famous guerrilla warfare generals was Francis Marion. Basically, guerrilla warfare is, remember, because we're Americans, we fight dirty, like Washington. Guerrilla warfare is basically hit and run attacks. As the British are marching down the road, they would hide in bushes, trees, and as they march by in their rows, there's nice, cute little rows with their big, huge red uniforms, basically with targets on them. They'd shoot from the bushes, from the trees, and then run away. Go hide and do it again. Guerrilla warfare slowed the British down and confused them and irritated them. The Americans start to have some success in North Carolina, but overwhelmingly in the South, the British continue to march through. There's another battle that sees the British defeated in North Carolina. So we do have some success in the South, but overall, the British continue to just keep marching through. North Carolina is the only area where we could really kind of slow them down. After some frustrating moments in North Carolina, Cornwallis is going to kind of just skip it pretty much. Cornwallis decides to move and attack Virginia. As he moves into Virginia, Thomas Jefferson is actually the governor of Virginia at this time. He's almost captured. Cornwallis marches through with the British Army and takes over all of the major cities and towns and port cities in Virginia, just like they've done with the rest of the South. Thomas Jefferson actually is able to run away to the countryside. Remember, geography. The British capture the cities. The Patriots control the countryside. So it's always a safe place to be in the countryside. After capturing major ports, all of the places in Virginia, the war for the South is pretty much done. The British have marched all the way from Georgia all the way through Virginia, and taken over tons of land with help from the Loyalists, captured port cities, towns all over the South. And they are done in Virginia. At this point, Cornwallis is low on supplies. So, because he's low on supplies, he needs to stop and wait for the British Navy to come resupply him, give him reinforcements. So he wants to make that as easy as possible for them. So he sets up on the coast of Virginia at a place called Yorktown, waiting for supplies. Now, at this point in the war, it's been a long war so far. We've seen British victories after British victories after British victories. We've seen some American victories, like Saratoga, which gets the French involved. And now we've got the French and the Americans with supplies fighting. So now it's a kind of even match. Over the years that this has been happening, we've got some British victories, some American victories. At this point in the war is almost over. Both sides have had victories and defeats. The British have controlled the cities. The Americans have controlled the countryside. Either side can claim victory with just one last major win. So, we'll talk about that more on Monday with the last battle of the Revolution, which is Yorktown.